Good evening and welcome. I'm Vincent Makori. This is Africa 54. U.S. President Barack Obama on Monday used the world stage at the United Nations General Assembly to make his case for more diplomacy and collective international action to tackle some globe's biggest problems and hotspots. Some 200 world leaders are in New York for the annual diplomatic gathering. The president arrived at the United Nations prepared to address the need for greater human rights around the world, the conflict in Ukraine, the fight against the Islamic State, and the need to counter the violent extremism and terrorism that it perpetrates across the Middle East. One of the items Mr. Obama spoke most strongly about was the ongoing civil war in Syria and the human suffering caused by Syrian leader Bashar al-Assad.
Nowhere is our commitment to international order more tested than in Syria. When a dictator slaughters tens of thousands of his own people, that is not just a matter of one nation's internal affairs. It breeds human suffering on an order of magnitude that affects us all. Likewise, when a terrorist group beheads captives, slaughters the innocent, and enslaves women, it's not a single nation's national security problem. That is an assault on all our humanity.
Well, in keeping with his theme of more international cooperation and being proactive, when hotspots pop up, President Obama addressed the revolution that ousted former Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi.
Where order has completely broken down, we must act. But we will be stronger when we act together. In such efforts, the United States will always do our part. We will do so mindful of the lessons of the past. Not just the lessons of Iraq, but also the example of Libya, where we joined an international coalition under a UN mandate to prevent a slaughter. Even as we helped the Libyan people bring an end to the reign of a tyrant, our coalition could have and should have done more to fill a vacuum left behind. We're grateful to the United Nations for its efforts to forge a unity government. We will help any legitimate Libyan government as it works to bring the country together. But we also have to recognize that we must work more effectively in the future as an international community to build capacity for states that are in distress before they collapse.
Well, for more on President Barack Obama's address at the UN General Assembly and his strongly worded comments about Syria and Libya, via UN correspondent Margaret Besheer joins us live from the UN in New York. Margaret?
Hello, Vincent. So yeah, some very interesting remarks on Libya and Syria. On Libya, I think it was a bit of a preemptive remark on President Obama's part because the Russians love to bring up Libya when they talk about the United States and all the things that we do wrong in their eyes. So I think that President Obama brought up Libya and sort of defended the U.S. and the coalition, but admitted also that more could and should have been done to prevent these power vacuums that we know have now led to two rival governments in Libya and the growth, the expansion of the Islamic State, the so-called Islamic State in Libya, and have led to great flows of migrants from Libya going across the Mediterranean to Italy. So he did touch upon it, and in fact, President Putin just spoke here, and he did bring up Libya and spoke about how countries grossly misused a UN Security Council resolution authorizing action there. So it did come up, yes.
Now,
and Syria. Yeah.
Yeah, now, you know,
no, go ahead, Vincent.
Talking about Syria, talking about the fight against extremism, President Obama talked about cooperating with other nations. And here people are looking at Russia and looking at Iran. Is that the biggest challenge in this fight?
Yeah, well, I think that was really a headline out of the speech that the U.S. would cooperate with Iran on Syria. But Mr. Obama was very clear. We will not allow President Assad to stay in power. As you played that clip, he speaks about his use of chemical weapons and indiscriminate bombing of his population, and he has lost his legitimacy in the eyes of the United States. So this, I don't know how that's going to play out, because Russia and Iran are Mr. Assad's two main allies, and President Putin was on a U.S. news program last night and speaking about Assad, and basically saying, well, what's the alternative? Islamic State? So he's sort of still very close with Mr. Assad, and he has expanded his military presence in that country in the last couple weeks. So it will be interesting to see where that goes. And today, Mr. Putin and Mr. Obama will be having their first meeting in many, many months. So we'll have to stay tuned to see what comes out of that.
And we know that other leaders are speaking, but also King of Jordan spoke and dwelt so much on the issue of ISIS. Now, a leader like the King of Jordan, does he bring the kind of go-between position, or rather middle ground position in the fight against ISIS here?
Well, Jordan is a frontline country, not just in the fight against ISIS, but in absorbing the refugees that are fleeing from Syria and from Iraq. So they have over 1 million refugees in Jordan. So they're really struggling under this burden. And so he definitely is somebody that world leaders are here to hear from. And Jordan's participation in this international effort is crucial. They're a key partner.
Yes, tell us a little more of what you expect from the leaders who are going to speak today, and especially African leaders.
Well, we are waiting to hear from President Buhari of Nigeria this afternoon. I would expect him to speak about Boko Haram. President Kenyatta is speaking today, so I'm sure we'll hear about al-Shabaab. I mean, terrorism is definitely a topic, not just in the speeches of individual leaders, but it's a topic on the agenda here at this annual meeting of world leaders at the UN. It's a very front and center subject, and tomorrow President Obama will be leading a summit on countering extremism, so we can expect to hear more on the subject tomorrow as well at that event.
And now, every leader comes and talks about quite a number of things. You talked about a particular theme for this year. Do some of these other issues sometimes tend to overwhelm the area that it should be of greater focus here?
Well, I think everyone thinks their issue is the most important issue, but I think certainly this year we're going to hear so much on the refugee and migrant crisis that's developed in Europe, and we're going to hear a lot on countering terrorism and on the so-called Islamic State. So these are going to be two of the really main topics, and they both tie into the crisis in Syria. And so we have to see some sort of resolution of this crisis. The Secretary General opened the GA this morning, and he said that 100 million people around the world are in need of humanitarian assistance, and that the UN has appealed for $20 billion this year, $20 billion, to help people in conflict and crisis zones. And so it's overwhelming. And President Obama did make the point that we have to work together. We have to have international cooperation. No one country can solve everything on their own. And if we don't work together, we're going to suffer the consequences.
Well, Margaret, thank you very much for your reporting there. Viewers, Margaret Besheer reporting live from New York. Margaret will join us again on Tuesday for more coverage of the UNGA.